Hello, in this lecture we're going to talk about monopoly and monopolistic competition, chapter 14. We're going to start off with our quote, which in this case will be from Henry Lloyd, who was a critic of monopolies at his time, being Standard Oil, and his quote in this case is, "Monopoly is business at the end of its journey." And I interpret that basically to mean that if we think about businesses, their end goal is basically monopoly. And for many people, that seems counterintuitive because we think of businesses as in competition. Just remember that when we think about competition, of course, we think about competition as good for us. We want more competition for the individuals because that drives down prices. However, in terms of the business, just like in terms of a team or sport or something like that, the goal is to win. And what is winning in terms of a business in a market? It would be to drive out all competition and have complete control over the market. That would be a monopoly. If one firm has complete control of the market, they would have a monopoly. Now, at one point in time, it might have been thought that that was kind of not possible, or if the rules were set up right or something, then one firm shouldn't have monopoly power. However, different industries may be more likely or more susceptible to monopoly power, as we'll discuss later. And Standard Oil was one of the first, basically the first monopoly within the United States. It's worth taking a look at them. And there's a big question as to how do we deal with monopoly? Is there some way to regulate it, or do we have to enter the market in different ways? How do we deal with a monopoly? Because clearly from the point of the consumer, monopolies aren't what we generally want for the most part, because if one person is running a large piece of the economy, that would be similar to having the same problems as a centrally planned center economy. They have no incentive to be efficient once they have won, because they're no longer in competition with anybody else. That's a problem, and that's something that is always discussed and considered, needs to be considered as we think about the economy. So our chapter goals will be to summarize how and why the decisions facing monopolistics differ from the collective decisions of competing firms. So when we make decisions as a monopoly, it's going to be different than, as we talked before, as a firm that's in competition, in perfect competition. We'll talk about why that is. Determine a monopolistic price, output, and profit graphically and numerically. Show graphically the welfare loss from monopoly. Explain why there would be no monopoly without barriers to entry, and explain how monopolistic competition differs from monopoly and perfect competition. Okay, so we have a monopolistic market. So what is monopoly? We'll start off with defining a monopoly, which is a market structured in which one firm makes up the entire market. So now we have one firm that is the market. And we looked last time as perfect competition, and notice the difference here. We're looking at the two extremes. Usually most firms aren't going to be on the two extremes, but it's good to analyze the two extremes because that gives us the good starting point on which to look. So some firms will be more close to perfect competition. Some types of industries lead themselves to be more perfect competition type of industries, and some firms and industries will be more monopolistic. And of course, there are times at which we've had perfect, basic monopolies, meaning one company, dominating the entire industry. So barriers to entry into the market prevent competition. So remember what barriers to entry are. They're going to be things that make it difficult for somebody else to enter the market. And again, as a company, if we're the company and we want to win, we want to be a monopoly, we want to destroy competition because we want to have a monopoly of the market, then they're going to try to build barriers to entry. And so there's a lot of different barriers to entries, and companies that, as they get larger, tend to want barriers to entry. So there could be legal barriers to entry. So obviously, if we created legislation, there could be barriers to industry. We see a lot of things in this point where we see large companies could actually lobby for things that would cost them money. You would say, well, why would they lobby for something that is actually costing that large company money? Well, it could be because it costs the smaller competitive firms money too, and they're more likely not to be able to withstand that. So there could be legal pressure in that case in terms of laws and regulations. But not all barriers to entry are going to be due to regulation. So there's going to be other types of barriers to entry, and it depends on the type of industry we're looking at in terms of what the barriers may be. Some industries lend themselves to have more barriers to entry. For example, if we had something like a phone company, and the phone company has to put all the phone lines into the state in order to have the network to work, then it would be very difficult if a new phone company had to enter the market by building their own network, by building their own phone lines. We'd have multiple phone lines all over the place. It would just cost too much for someone else to try to enter that market once the market had already been basically set up and dominated because of that. And so for that reason, some types of industries tend to be more of natural monopoly type industries. They tend towards monopoly. Another requirement for monopolistic competition is that there are no close substitutes for a monopolistic product. So remember what a substitute is. That means that something, if the price goes up on our product, then something else could take the place of that product fairly easily. For example, if we were selling donuts and we rose our prices, then someone could buy Danishes, right? So even if we had a complete monopoly on all donuts and there were no other donut shops for whatever reason, then they could go next door and buy a Danish, then they may still do that. We don't really have a monopoly in that case because of the close substitute. So the key difference between a monopolistic and perfect competitor: a monopolistic firm's marginal revenue is not its price. So remember when we talked about pure competition, we said that the firm is a price taker. That means that if the firm goes into the market, they have to take the price of the market because of the competition. So we said that the marginal revenue is the price. In monopolies, that's not the case. So marginal revenue is always below price in the case of the monopoly. So marginal revenue changes as output changes and is not equal to price. A monopolistic firm's output decision can affect price. So of course, when we talk about a monopolistic firm, we can change our output. We have more control over the market, obviously, and we can then change the level of output, which will affect the price. There is no competition in monopolistic markets, so monopolies see to it that monopolists, not consumers, benefit. So what we're saying here is that, remember that when we think about the market, of course, we're thinking that the firm is going to try to maximize their own benefits. But it just so happens that in terms of competition, the firm's benefit is maximized where they maximize the consumer's benefit. They two line up because of the competition. So even though we are looking after our self-interest in that way, we still tend towards the best thing for the consumer because of competition. That's the idea of the market in the first place. But if, of course, we are the only person in charge, we have the same kind of problems that we would have on a command-based market, meaning that we have a central person basically in control of the entire market. There is no competition. There's no drive for us to do better. There's no drive for us to improve the prices. There's no drive for us to have better customer service too much, really, because we have no one competing against us. And therefore, when we're going to set the prices, same idea. We're going to set prices in terms to maximize the profit for the company, not the individuals. And in terms of a monopoly, there's no market, there's no competition to regulate that. So determining the monopoly's price and output numerically. So the goal of the monopolist firm is to maximize profit. We're always going to assume that's always the goal. That's always the goal of the firm in a monopolistic market, and it's the goal of a firm that's in competition. The only difference is that a monopoly has nobody to limit their maximizing profit by increasing prices. They have no one to put a check on how high they can make the prices through that mechanism of markets, of competition. The difference between total revenue and total cost, that's of course the profit. The money maximizing profit when marginal revenue equals marginal cost. No difference here, so keep that in mind. We're just going to keep saying that. We're going to produce the word marginal revenue. The added amount on the margin is greater than the marginal cost. And so the marginal revenue is the change in the total revenue associated with a change in quantity, and the marginal cost is the change in the cost associated with the change in the quantity. So remember, we're always making the decisions at the margin and at the point in time in the next, basically we can think kind of like the next unit of production. At the point in time, as long as the marginal revenue is greater than the marginal cost, then we're going to keep going. At the point in time where marginal cost is greater than marginal revenue, then of course that's when we're going to stop. That's when it doesn't make sense for us to continue on the production. So the profit maximizing condition of a monopolistic firm is, once again, when marginal revenue equals marginal cost. No change there. That's where we're going to produce within perfect competition, within monopolies, and within competition. Remember that for monopolies, marginal revenue is less than price. This is what's different than perfect competition, where when we were the price taker, the marginal revenue equals price when we were in perfect competition. For monopolies, marginal revenue less than price. A monopolistic firm maximizes total profit, not profit per unit. So if the marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, the monopoly can increase profit by increasing output. So if we're getting more on the margin for another unit of output for marginal revenue over marginal cost, then we're going to increase revenue by producing more. And on the other hand, of course, if marginal revenue is less than marginal cost, then the monopoly can increase profit by decreasing its output. So if by producing more units, we're having a situation where the marginal cost of producing the unit is greater than the marginal revenue that we're getting from it, then we need to scale back the level of production.